has become one of the most discussed crime cases of recent times is that of David Anthony Burke, who went by the stage name David. David was at the peak of his career. He dropped a high-charting debut album, he had millions of social media followers, and was significantly wealthy for a man only 20 years old. However, in September of 2020,
Yep.
detectives discovered the body of a 14-year-old girl that had been missing for months, Celeste Rivas Hernandez, in the trunk of his Tesla, decomposed, dismembered, and abandoned. And for months, people debated on whether they believed that this innocent-looking, clean-shaven young man with a melodic voice could do the things he'd been accused of. But now that David has been arrested for murder, and the prosecution have documented their evidence, the likelihood that this was some sort of setup has been significantly reduced. It became evidenced that David had a physical relationship with Celeste while she was still a child, and when they broke up and she allegedly threatened to expose the relationship to ruin his career, the prosecution believed he took matters into his own hands to protect what he'd built. But when you add the context that he made music constantly that included themes of blood, violence, and a romance that ends in tragedy, it's caused a lot of people to suspect that this outcome was something David always wanted. However, I'm not here to discuss theory and conspiracy. I'm here to clinically answer two main overarching questions. How did David's life engineer him to become someone capable of potentially murdering and dismembering a child? And if he did, then what mental mechanisms allowed him to carry on with life after the fact, knowing the body of the girl he was once in?
We need to rethink everything
Intimate with was
because we asked him what life choices led him down this path. How did he live with himself, brother? What do you think? This was, brother. He's clearly capable of much worse than this. If you can brush this off, you're capable of much worse.
decomposing in his car.
I don't even think
It's
that's
easy to just label him as pure evil and move on, but as a student of psychology, I find it crucial that we understand what happened to him in childhood, what were the warning signs, and
okay. So actually, let me stop
figure out the
pausing.
why that surely exists in this story. There's a lot of questions I've seen online that I think I have the ability to answer by the end of this video. Answers that will give you a
I'm
genuine
gonna be honest. There's a few things for me. I'm gonna sum up this whole video in an assumption. There's a few things that stand out with like these type of cases, especially psychopaths and just serial serial like just disturbed individuals to the point of like violent, very violent things. It's status. It's probably physical insecurity. I'm gonna be honest with David. There's like a lot of things that you just like. I've seen and heard cases like that in people turning to the extreme, like his place in society, all that stuff. There's a very clear physical things mentally. You can just you just literally just said it. His music had a theme and a set thing. That was what he blew up off of. That's red flag number two. I would have focused more on the physical insecurities and stuff like that because I'm not like a physical specimen myself. have I had those insecurities and stuff like that? Sure, but I've even seen cases of very violent, or at least mentally, just like for individuals, like they would just be aggressive. Like I've seen figures of his stature in other people of all ethnic groups, like men and women. It's now that's like very simplifying like what it is, but I'm saying those are just like multiple things that's one of the few things I see that are just like very
When
obvious.
understanding into the mind and psychology of David Anthony Burke.
I played it for her in the car. She was like, David, this song is too violent. You talking about killing people in your music? No, not my son. I was like, wait, I might be onto something.
This video constitutes behavioral analysis and psychological observation only. It does not constitute a clinical.
Let's start from the beginning. So, you're a New Yorker.
New Yorker, Queens, New York.
What are your parents like? Are they musicians?
Not at all. My dad is a litigator for a law firm. My
Okay.
mother was a teacher.
Okay.
She doesn't.
This gets so crazy. So your dad is a lawyer and your mom is a teacher. Holy. So you clearly grew up well, but I won't assume.
do it anymore, but she does notary now.
David Anthony Burke was born in Queens, New York, to Colleen and Dawood Burke, two Christian parents that seemingly would give him a tough and controlled upbringing.
Everything we played in the house, music-wise, was just Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, gospel music, like classical stuff, instrumentals only. Like, we didn't listen to any other music. There was no, like, Lady Gaga and all the popular artists everybody was listening to. We never could listen to that because my parents just wouldn't let us. It was just, like, straight classical stuff.
It was literally nothing. It was all gospel and, like, classical, Mozart, Bach, like, all that kind of stuff. Because my parents wanted me to be really smart. They never, like, talked about college or anything like that, but they always wanted me to be very intellectual, very put together, have an idea what I'm doing.
So this is
but they never, like,
this is a capable
listen to music like that at all.
A intellectual psycho. Okay, there we go. That's what we're dealing with. Wow. All right.
Trying to control what your kids listen to and the content they consume isn't necessarily harmful in and of itself, but if a kid is going to school and has no level of cultural relatability, it can cause feelings of being excluded, which in turn affects his socialization. If everyone got to access music and it became a point of discussion he couldn't involve himself in, it might have led to feelings of envy, and instead of David accepting this, he tried to find a way around it.
Did your parents put sort of a cap on what you couldn't listen to in the
Nah,
house?
I was sneaking
It
around.
wasn't like that.
I had this little iPod. I used to sneak. I got it with me right now too. I still got these. I used to sneak around with the
my
iPod
God.
Touch. I used to sneak around with the iPod Touch and download things off iTunes and stuff like that.
The sneaking around his parents like this is consistent with reactance theory, proposed by Jack Brem in 1966. When perceived behavioral freedom is restricted, individuals are motivated to reclaim it. In these situations, the forbidden fruit, which for David would have been music, becomes more desirable, and the individual tries to acquire it by any means, even if
He's trying to tie this to music specifically. Again, what I mentioned earlier, that's more likely what occurred. It was physical insecurities, mental, just like breakdowns. There's more things potentially. Like, you have to question, like, could there have anything else been happening at home? Those are far more prudent than his parents wanting the best for him, recognizing the garbage in or rather plan A for distracting the youth's mind with the celebrity, with what they're supposed to see as like culturally like right. Like, that was good. That's what most parents should do, because you see other cultures, everything outside of America, and when parents put restrictions on for that child, because as he said, they wanted for him to at least be sharp up here. That's the play. That's the literal play. That's like the baseline, at least now. So
to include
no offense, I
secrecy.
don't
Now,
agree
it's
with
not the
this.
behavior itself that's necessarily significant, but the pattern it
That's like
establishes
such a small
that
part.
authority is to be managed through concealment rather than confronted directly. This pattern would then reoccur later for his adult life.
And also, I'm gonna be honest, like, now that I look at certain streamers, like, this is present specifically in streamer space, and then like a lot of celebrities. Like I see some of them, how they move, how they talk, like their physical statures. I can see clear signs of had this not worked out for them, and or they were like things could have went really left. So there's just like very simple things, and then
It didn't help David that his private school life in New York also consisted of bullying and teachers picking on him. So he had an uneasy time both at school and at home.
I hated New York at that point. Like,
Why did you
I didn't
hate
like
it?
my school. I was at a
'cause
private
you see-
school, and they treated me so horribly, dude.
Why?
It was insane. I don't know. All the teachers had it out for me. My little brother could testify to that too. Dude, they just had it out for me all the time. I don't know what it was. I would just do nothing to nobody, and the teachers would just pick on me and bully me for no reason, bro. I wanted to leave that place so bad.
And he got his wish as they moved to Houston, Texas, and he found it slightly better at his new school. But he was a kid that didn't really seem to find anything that stuck. His parents tried to get him into music, but it wasn't stimulating enough for him at that time.
She put me into piano lessons when I was 7, and then I quit that after a week. She was like, okay, I'm not gonna pay for it if you don't like it. Quit that. I went into she put me in a church choir when I was 8. Quit that, and then I
Developed into a conventionally social child. He describes himself as a people watcher rather than a member of a friend group, sitting apart in cafeteria settings and constructing fictional narratives around classmates that they were unaware of.
At school, before I was homeschooled, like middle school, elementary, I would look at these kids, like at cafeteria, at lunch was like my playground, like my brain's playground. Like there's so many different kids and they're all doing something different. I would just sit there and I'm a people watcher. I would just inspect them and like write about them and stuff
red flag number 1. Well, for me, red flag number 2. But thank you for revealing that.
like that. And I kind of brought these characters to life that were inspired by my classmates. So every time I would write like a short story, I'd have these different classmates in these stories and they would never know. It's like different names and everything, but they were inspired by my classmates.
This preference to observe people and create these stories was an early marker that he had a natural tendency to see people as subjects for analysis rather than reciprocal social partners. Combined with his bullying in New York, it suggests he felt more inclined to exist on the edge of social bubbles rather than in them, present but not integrated, watching but not connecting. He says he began writing poetry in the 5th grade and pursued anime, gaming, and creative fiction from a young age.
Yeah, ever since I was young, I really just liked anime, gaming, and poetry. That's it. I remember reading my first manga when I was in 5th grade. Dragon Ball, Tokyo Ghoul, and see these fantasy characters with powers and all that. That weren't superheroes, and that inspired me to start writing and write my own stories about them.
But just in case his parents couldn't give him any more reason to resent them, they took him out of public school, the only place he was getting any sort of socialization, the place where he was letting his imagination run wild, and they instead placed him on an isolated homeschool curriculum.
Transitioning from public school to homeschool is tragic. The first 2 years was tragic.
Tragic.
I was asking to go back to school almost every day. My brother too.
Was the decision to move from public schooling to homeschooling a difficult one?
It was, and it wasn't mine, it was my parents.
So it's like,
So that tells me, in my opinion, they saw something that they probably wanted to shield him from, or it was probably behind closed doors, or maybe it was something wasn't being said. That's what it seems like, because again, like, if we're going on like what this guy is currently being charged with, and then you're using these as references, I'm like, I would take that with a grain of salt. I would be looking 2 layers deeper, like the whys, always the whys, and what purpose does this serve? To protect him from, or protect from him? An idea or anything. So
there's 2 different types of homeschooling in America. There's like group homeschooling, where it's parents that don't want their kids to be in public school environments, but they still want them to be in social groups. So they have you have homeschool kids that meet once a week at a specific place, and they play like extracurricular activities like basketball and stuff like that, so they can socialize, and they do the work on paper. And then there's a second homeschooling where it's just strictly on computer. That's what I did.
They didn't let him enroll on the socialized model involving group meetings with peers, but a fully computer-based, home-based program with no structured peer contact whatsoever. From a developmental psychology standpoint, this is the most significant single environmental factor in his profile. Erikson's 8th stage model identifies adolescents, approximately 12 to 18 years old, as the critical period for identity versus role confusion. The developmental task of forming a stable, coherent sense of self through peer interaction social experimentation, group belonging, and the feedback of others. Removing a child from that process during its peak window doesn't simply slow development, it redirects it, and they don't develop normally. And the main damage that came from that cutoff was socializing. None of his peers stayed in contact with him following the transition, and he was all alone.
I thought I had a lot of friends in middle school.
And guess what? The mental fortitude kept me going, despite anything, any bad thing, anything. Like,
And then after being homeschooled, nobody's hitting me up. Nobody's asking me, like, where am I at? Why am I not coming to school today? It made me question, like, what is a real friend? And do I have any of those as well?
Especially when I was transitioning from public school to homeschooling and nobody like hit me up on Snapchat when I was like streaking everybody. My Snap score was like 250,000, bro.
And nobody hits you back?
Nobody, dude.
What the
That's what I'm saying. Like nobody, like, who, you not at school? Where'd you go, Dave? Like nobody, like, dude, did I really have friends? And you start to question things.
Oh,
like,
totally.
About your everyday life. It's like, who's really there for you at the end?
I mean, dude, homeschooling really takes a toll on a kid. Like,
Isolation.
yeah, and there's outlets like I know I made a couple friends now that were homeschooled, but they had like these groups that they would go to like bi-weekly and just to socialize. But I didn't have that. Like,
David would start to feel a growing disconnect between himself and his age mates, and an acute awareness of experiences that he was excluded from. I've gone through his TikTok, and this was clearly what hit him hardest. He was emotional seeing homeschool proposals. He has another post titled, "What It Felt Like to Be a Homeschool Teen," and I won't play the audio for copyright reasons, but the lyrics go, "Everybody's falling in love and I'm falling behind," as he visibly shows his frustration at that fact. He missed out on having high school relationships, but had to watch everyone else get to have one through Snapchat. His former peers got to post relationship quotes and pictures with their partner, whilst he stayed at home, unable to do anything but watch. As the caption says, homeschool and being on social media 24/7 was not a good mix. In another
but you're using the social media
post, he says his superpower is never being able to express my feelings properly because I was homeschooled and had no social life for 5 years. And on another, he says, I was homeschooled all my life. I never got to experience any school dances. When adolescents are denied normal peer socialization, the need for connection and belonging doesn't disappear. It finds alternative channels. In David's case, that channel was the internet, specifically Fortnite, YouTube, Discord, TikTok, and eventually music. During his homeschooled years, David describes Fortnite as his primary social environment. He engaged in squad fields, which is where you're allowed to join games with strangers and talk to them if you have a headset and mic. And he allowed people to vent their personal problems to him.
Especially being homeschooled and not having a social life, right? So I'm on the game, I'm talking to all these random people, and they're talking to me about their life problems, you know, using video games to escape the real world as much as I am, and then living my life vicariously through them and like writing songs about their lives.
Yeah.
I would go on Discord and I would go on Fortnite and I would go on like squad fills and I just let people talk to me and just tell me about their lives. Cause like most of these people that play video games the same way I do, they're going to it as an escape. So I was just being an open door and an open outlet for like my peers and my friends to kind of just like vent to me about different things in their like personal lives and stuff like that.
And I'm like 15, 14 at this time, so I don't know how to like be a therapist, right? But it's like I'm taking this information and all these different people talking to me about different like problems and situations. I'm like, wow, this is really what humans are like. Like, these are humans.
The fact he says, wow, so this is what humans are like, these are humans, tells me that this was the only way David was understanding human psychology at that time. This is a clinically unusual developmental pathway. Normally, an adolescent's model of human behavior is built through direct, embodied, reciprocal experience, like friendship, conflict, romantic experience, loss, etc. But David built his model of human psychology through a parasocial and
not just him. I would say some of Gen Z, a lot of Gen Alpha have also, well, I mean, gotta love the credit the internet and the powers that be for that. They made sure they put the right people in place for them to look at, you know, all lower than 24, younger than 24, and some of the similar things, like very similar social cues and patterns, and like obviously now these kids want to run up to them and be like them. So, but this is more on the creep and predator side of things, which that's another problem too.
semi-anonymous listening role, absorbing other people's problems through a gaming headset. This produces a specific kind of social intelligence, highly observational, empathically competent on an intellectual level, but fundamentally disembodied. He understands humans like a researcher understands subjects, not as a participant understands his peers. And that's going to be significant when evaluating his later relational behavior. So he was chronically online, seemingly addicted to video games, but being home alone that much allowed him to stumble across much worse vices. Later, in his own Discord server, David disclosed a sustained pattern of consuming gore content beginning at approximately 14 years old, following the accidental exposure to a cartel execution video. Gore is real-world violence and injury, fully uncensored, including death and murder, and he was discovering that and watching it repeatedly at 14 years old. He describes a progression from initial shock response to habituation, saying, "It got to the point where I don't even cringe when I see it anymore," to then developing a dissociative response, claiming he started laughing at one point, but then escalated to deliberate intentional use. "I watch gore to disconnect the part of my brain that feels empathy to the wrong things." We have something called an amygdala, which generates the brain's threat and disgust response to violence. Repeated exposure to graphic stimuli triggers habituation and desensitization.
Even if you're desensitized, always can point out being wrong and express it being wrong with words, always. So these are very, very good expressions, and this is new information for me, but sorry.
Simpler words, the threshold for what makes the brain want to cringe and look away rises because the stimulus is no longer threatening due to seeing it so much. What David describes in his Discord is consistent with this process in adolescence, whose prefrontal regulatory systems are still maturing and therefore less equipped to contextualize and contain the desensitizing effect. But what distinguishes David's disclosure from typical adolescent experimentation is that last part. He doesn't describe watching gore for entertainment or shock value. He describes it as an emotional engineering exercise, a deliberate attempt to modify his own empathic response. This level of intention.
It's like, so to basically give you guys a heads up, we're gonna be watching Jayoma next. Try to figure out a way to defend him. Now that this is all the information I need to understand. All of the decisions, not all, I'll say some of the decisions from the parents and everything else was not by accident, whether they say it or not. And then some of his feelings towards like him being excluded, or there is more to those stories, as we all do, most situations are. There's more to it, context wise, that clearly wasn't reciprocated or understood or brought up to like anybody, David or anybody else around him. That's just what I'm getting at.
Rationality about emotional desensitization in a 14-year-old is far from typical and represents a significant clinical signal. This would have been a major warning sign and red flag that David was gaining the ability to care less about human life. During that same isolated period, David developed an elaborate alter ego he called Itami, a Japanese word meaning pain.
I have this alter ego named Itami, which means pain in Japanese, and I'm heavily inspired by like anime and stuff like that. But that character that's in the music videos I make now was actually an idea that I had years before music even started, when I was writing my first comic book. And it was this detective that would solve his own crime. So he was the good guy by day, and then at night he'd kind of transform into this alter ego and then commit crimes he'd solved the morning of.
But
look at that. People are fascinated by this. I'm just like, guys. Oh, brother. People are like, this is a profound discovery in our youth. No. Patterns, recognition. Like, it's not what he's saying. Like, it's not to say, oh, gotcha, because the body of work itself is a gotcha. Like, he himself is gotcha. To describe, it's not masterful, but to be at such a profound level, to give away the game while presenting it as in this context, like a interview, that is, again, that's not masterful, but that is as close as you can get to, wow. More concerning than I thought, but not for him. I'm concerned for the other cases we haven't found, and specifically those younger and of similar age that we simply aren't privy to yet.
Tommy isn't this artistic, creative concept he's come up with. David described it in multiple interviews as a character he intended to develop into his own manga, one who was explicitly him, a detective who committed murders and then investigated them himself.
Big part of that manga was an evil version of me, an agent of chaos and kind of my alter ego, and there was an evil version of myself that would kind of come out at random moments, kind of like Fight Club with Tyler Durden, and he would commit the crimes that I would have to solve as the detective. So like when I was as the detective, I'd be like solving murders that I'm committing myself.
Understand that there's a difference between normal fantasy and what David's doing. We all might fantasize here and there, maybe about obtaining a certain level of wealth or driving a certain car or whatever you guys care about. Escapist fantasy uses fictional scenarios to temporarily relieve stress and provide alternative experience. The psychological concept of fantasy elaboration, however, involves constructing increasingly detailed, immersive internal worlds in which the individual places themselves, not a character, but themselves, and which begin to function as a parallel framework for understanding identity and relationships. David explicitly inserted himself into this narrative. He is not the author of Itami. He's Itami's counterpart. They share an existence. He later described Itami as
the one that is weaving his way into my relationships and ruining them and inducing trauma and things like that.
This language suggests that the alter ego had become a psychological he is not relationships. David explicitly as a parallel framework.
I fantasized like a child before that. I was a superhero. Fantasizing about powers. Unlimited money. Being in different roles in society. Man, maybe it's just me, but the bandwidth for just cutting things off at a certain level, just like stopping it, just saying this is the line. Like, most people are different, and I guess.
Framework for understanding identity and relationships. David explicitly inserted himself into this narrative. He is not the author of Itami. He's Itami's counterpart. They share an existence. He later described Itami as
the one that is weaving his way into my relationships and ruining them and inducing trauma and things like that.
This language suggests that the alter ego had become a psychological container for the parts of himself he wished to disown but had not eliminated. David transitioned into music accidentally in late 2021 after copyright strikes on his gaming content prompted his mother to suggest he create original music.
I started making music in like December 2021. I used to be a Fortnite YouTuber, bro. Like, it's so crazy. Only reason I started making music is because my videos got copyrighted, because I was using like Scissors music, Justin Bieber music, all that. And my mom was like, yo, if you're getting copyright strike, you're not making no money, make your own song. So I was like, bro, I could probably do that.
Because of his ability, I know he's able to play and do, so I said, just make your own music. And that was that.
So I kept doing it. And then it kind of just became this thing where the music was getting more popular than the Fortnite videos. My SoundCloud numbers surpassed my Fortnite videos numbers. Crazy. And it was out of here, bro.
He had no prior musical ambition. What he did have, though, was years of accumulated internal material. The Itami fantasy, the observational cycles, years of accumulated...
Out of here, bro.
He had no prior musical ambition. What he did have, though, was years of accumulated internal material. The Itami fantasy, the observational psychology built through online listening, the poetry he had written since 5th grade, and a set of emotional themes like isolation, romantic destruction, duality that had no other outlet. Music gave that internal world a public form. It also gave it a socially legitimate one. Dark themes that are wrapped in musical craft don't register to us listeners as warning signs. They register as artistry. The same content that might raise concern if it was in a journal or a private communication is celebrated when it has a compelling melody behind it. David's own statements confirm that his early music was not drawn from lived experience, but from imagination and preparation.
When I write music about heartbreak and the sad type of things, I write it not from experience, because I was a really homebody. I was homeschooled. Like, I didn't have much of a social outlet like that. I write it in like preparation. I feel like when you commit to love, you commit to devastation as well.
I think it's a mixture of like trying to figure it out myself and then looking at other people's experiences. I mean, 'cause I've never experienced like true heartbreak either. So I write all these songs in preparation for it, so I'm not devastated, you know? So I know what to expect.
He describes writing about
this guy is fantastic, pathological liar. I've caught like 4 just not inconsistencies, but not verbatim, but like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm letting you know in advance. I've caught 5 of those already, plus a lot more. But
heartbreak in preparation, having never experienced it. He states directly, "I love over-dramatized themes of romance because it would never be like this in real life."
I love over-dramatized themes of romance because it would never be like this in real life. So it allows you to like have more room to play around.
The thematic content of his early catalogue in 2022, like Bleed Out in March, Dirty Secrets in May, Romantic Homicide in July, centers on romantic destruction, hiding dark secrets, killing a romantic partner, and feeling no remorse. Romantic Homicide's central lyric, which David explains in detail in a Genius interview, is constructed specifically around the active first person. Not just you died, but I killed you. He stresses the first person agency.
Which was in the back of my mind, but then you think that I'm gonna say you died, but I say I killed you. So it's not like the thought of her is gone by itself was something that she did, it was something that I decided to do. And I killed her in the back of my mind.
the bigger discussion of these platforms needs to be called into question, but like, it's, you have to, the pushback on that would be so funny because people be like, well, that has nothing to do with, but I'm like, dude, like, giving these people the platform to explain themselves and not raising all the flags, every flag in the flipping rainbow, to, bro, sirens, everything just going off. Like, this is not even expertly, like, it's, I'm saying this because, like, this is, in hindsight, right? Hindsight, you don't let the flipping, a devil seed incarnate just roam free without checks and balances on its every step. But, I mean, dude.
He also describes the back of my mind as the location of this act, which is precisely where he has told us that his fantasy lives. His mother's reaction to Romantic Homicide is very ironic, but also significant.
I showed it to my mother, and she was like, "That song's too violent and too sad. You're not releasing it. My son is not gonna be talking about killing people in music." And I was like, I'm gonna take that as a challenge, low-key. I played it for her in the car, and she was like, "David, this song is too violent. You're talking about killing people in your music? No, not my son." And I was like, wait, I might be onto something, bro.
She identified something real in the content. He overrode her objection anyway and released it, and that song was the one that became his commercial breakthrough. The commercial success of Romantic Homicide is a pivotal moment in the psychology trajectory. David didn't receive
The only bad thing about this song is that it has to end. How nostalgic this song will be in 10 years. 10 out of 10 song. I want a whole album like this. What? Oh my goodness.
receive any social correction for expressing violent romantic fantasy. He received validation, streams, a record deal with Interscope.
There you go. Now we're starting to get into a lot of the enablers. Oof, there's so many actors in this. Not the act of him brutally, in my opinion, murdering someone. the other actors in play, it is just like, this is one big act and stuff like, this is what's rewarded, is essentially my point. Like, this is rewarded, not knowing after the fact, like, this is rewarded. And it's not like every person
and multi-million-dollar career momentum.
I get the first email from the labels. I showed them. I'm like, all right, my mom has to hear about this now. I was like, there's no way I can like sweep this under the rug. I'm getting really famous right now. And then I meet
203 million. I'm not gonna say what that really was, but that's okay. 203 million.
Scope, who I eventually signed with, and I meet on my team Mogul Vision for management, that I signed on management. And then at that point, it was just time to push the button.
From a behavioral reinforcement standpoint, this is near optimal conditioning. The behavior, which was externalizing dark fantasy through art, produced the outcome most desired by someone with his developmental history, which was belonging, recognition, status, and the experience of being known without truly being seen. Because not only did he blow
absolutely fooling the, like, he built that. He built a effing character. Told you the Jekyll and Hyde act, and this was the outcome you thought, brother. To the average person, he's clearly like a mastermind, but brother, level 2 of critical thinking moves you past a lot of this.
Up in music, but that coincided with social media fame like TikTok, where he got tons of engagement. But looking back on that, those fans were engaging with someone who wasn't even their true self and who never took the mask off.
I got me as the artist, David, D4VD, Itami, which is the antagonist. He wears the blindfold. My gaming character is coming soon. He is like the one that's super tech savvy and stuff like that. And then my social media persona, which is also being built out as we speak. And that's the 4.
He constructed an entire identity architecture around himself with those 4 defined personas: David the artist, Itami the antagonist, a gaming persona, and a social media persona, none of which were David Anthony Burke, the actual self.
They were all him, all the time, everywhere, all at once. Maybe the point of the master at work here is, I don't know.
Was not among them.
I don't know.
What researchers describe as identity diffusion, where the boundary between constructed persona and authentic self becomes genuinely unclear, appears to be happening here. The masks were not overlaid on a stable self. They may have become the primary mode of self-experience. So David from early on learned how to switch between characters. In private, he could be this antisocial kid with dark fantasies. In interviews, he could sound smart and sophisticated. And on TikTok, he could do his best to be relatable and goofy to his audience. That ability to switch became something that we now potentially know might have helped him deal with the consequences of his future actions. According to prosecution documents, David and Celeste Rivas Hernandez first made contact online in January 2022 when she was 11 years old and he was 16. This reportedly happened on Fortnite, which would be consistent with how David got his social interaction when he was homeschooled. The prosecution documents confirm a physical relationship began in November 2023 when Celeste was 13 and David was 18. So they knew each other online for almost 2 years before ever becoming intimate. This is purely my opinion based on available context and evidence, but I don't believe David sought out Celeste in a predatory form, looking for a minor specifically because that's what physically attracted him. The fact he was only 16 at the
I will turn off this video right now. This in dot. No. Nope. Whatever spin you have, I rebuke it.
time and was being homeschooled makes it completely plausible that the relationship began with 8 folks and wasn't started off in any inappropriate. Documents a pattern that David was grooming Celeste in stages.
There you go. Like, get past that bullshit you were talking.
That got gradually more intense. The first thing he did was make her feel special. He released a romantic homicide music video on Celeste's birthday. He then recorded a song titled Celeste in December 2023, expressing deep personal obsession, and he continually maintained her presence in his Discord server. The song Celeste references the girl with my name tattooed on her chest, a detail that subsequently materialized in reality when Celeste had his name tattooed on her finger and shared it in the Discord server in July 2024. He also never publicly posted her on social media, but would post pictures where she's present but not identifiable, or captioning posts referencing having a girlfriend to show his fans he was in a relationship, which gave his romantic music credibility. Another thing he did was use financial control. Prosecution documents confirmed that after Celeste's parents removed her phone from her in February 2024, David drove to Lake Elsinore where she lives and paid a classmate $1,000 to provide Celeste with a new phone he had purchased so that they could maintain contact. This was done after law enforcement had directly informed him that she was a 13-year-old runaway.
As some of the comments accurately predicted, had he not been famous, this would have been a lifestyle for him. Fuck the excuses. This is a predator. Straight up predator. Straight up. I'm not gonna groom. Straight up predator. I've heard stories of her not. Who knows the actual status of her, what she was going through, her parents, but my friends, like, it doesn't. This is, yeah. I'll say one thing. It's really, I'm at least glad to know we get a glimpse into yet another agent of evil and of obsession, most things wrong in humans. We get another glimpse into the framework and patterns that they evolve and mix with our everyday life, using things we should be using on a day-to-day basis as tools to extend what they've always wanted to do.
Despite her parents and law enforcement trying to stop David from connecting with her, he chose to go around them anyway. He then isolated her from her family and support system. There's debate on whether Celeste had the best home life in the first place, but David definitely capitalized on that and took advantage of her vulnerability. Throughout 2024, the prosecution documents confirmed that Celeste spent significant time at David's Hollywood Hills residence, accompanied him to Las Vegas, London, and Texas, and was repeatedly reported missing by her family. This pattern of running away is consistent with successful grooming. The victim's primary attachment has been displaced towards the perpetrator. David had become the new safe place in her eyes, which is really sad to think about in hindsight. Another thing David desired was surveillance and control. It could be for humor purposes, so take it as context rather than fact, but in January 2024, after they'd started a physical relationship, he posted a TikTok with the text on the screen implying a partner telling him that she will swallow an AirTag so he gets to know her every move. It seems playful on the surface, but with the context we have, he's describing a desire for a constant location surveillance over a minor. On January 11th, 2024, David did a Twitch stream, but he had Celeste in full view of his audience, right there in plain sight. She was wearing a hoodie and glasses to perhaps conceal suggestions at her age, and they seemed to be doing a cooking stream.
Season it? It's already seasoned, bro. It's Alfredo.
I'm yet to find the full stream, but something gets said beforehand, and the comments start saying things like, "Pray for his career, chat. You're done for, bro. Nah, you going on the Epstein list. There's no escaping this, bro. Caught you in 4K. All messages that allude to the chat realizing that David is allegedly. David reads these comments out aloud and questions Celeste. Are we done? To which Celeste says, we need to delete this.
Pray for his career, chat. Maz, can we? Y'all are not done? Now you going on Epstein? Yo.
To keep this relationship a secret, and this was the closest he'd gotten to being exposed. The chat continues with David and Celeste Island trip and David Epstein flight list. But something else gets said, and David put, no, you didn't.
Media.
I personally don't.
Yo,
I media trained you.
No, you didn't.
He says that's controversial, and she questions him with something that almost exposed his secret to the world.
That's controversial. Really good.
Okay,
It's been a good one. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Mwah, 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 mwah. Oh my. Delete everything. Delete everything. Everything goes.
She seemingly regrets saying it straight away, and David ends the stream. Of course, I have to preface that streaming clips get taken out of context all the time. What we don't know is what was actually said beforehand, and the chat could have been referencing something completely different. But what we do know is that David was making attempts to media train Celeste, in his own words. Due to him understanding what he was doing was wrong, this is an attempt at power control, because by giving her instructions on how to act, she's molded to become more obedient. It's crazy that this Twitch stream is almost a mirror of what the prosecution are alleging David did to Celeste over a year later. When he was on the verge of getting exposed, he tells his mods to delete everything, to physically discard of the evidence so that no one can find out the truth. He did what he needed to maintain control over the narrative, and panics when there's a risk of the mask slipping. Prosecution documents state that Celeste and David broke up in November 2024, though text messages confirm a continued sexual contact through to at least March 2025. The documented text exchanges describe Celeste growing distress at the nature of their relationship. She messaged, according to prosecution filings, "All we do is have sex and just hang out, man. I want more than that for myself." If you notice, the prosecution frames this as evidence of David's manipulation. This is because of the context that is supposedly surrounding this message. The prosecution's argument is that David had deliberately led her to believe that they had some sort of future together, that she was his girlfriend, his partner, someone he was building something with, specifically in order to maintain physical access to her and her silence. She was emotionally invested in a future I don't think he actually planned to give her. Now, before we proceed, I have to reiterate, because I know how soft the YouTube guidelines are when it comes to active cases and demonetization, but David is only alleged to have murdered Celeste Rivas Hernandez and has pleaded not guilty. So take what I say next as opinion, as rumors, as theory, but not fact, because his behavior over 2025, if not guilty of the murder, just looks like normal behavior. But that's also the problem if he is guilty, because only a psychopath could do what's been done to Celeste and go about life as normal. On the night of April 22nd, 2025, prosecution documents describe a lengthy argument conducted over text messages. Celeste had become aware of David's relationships with other women. Although they supposedly weren't in a relationship anymore, this triggered Celeste, and she threatened to expose their relationship publicly and destroy his music career. His debut studio album, Withered, was scheduled for release April 25th, 2025, so 3 days later. On top of that, he had a multi-million-dollar career, active endorsements, and a world tour booked. The prosecution alleges that at approximately 8:40 p.m. on April 23rd, 2025, David ordered an Uber to transport Celeste from her Lake Elsinore home to his Hollywood Hills residence. She arrived at approximately just after 10 p.m. The prosecution alleges that shortly after her arrival, David stabbed her multiple times and stood by while she bled out, making no attempt to call emergency services. At approximately 11:30 p.m., he drove north on the 101 freeway to Santa Barbara County, texting and calling Celeste's phone as he drove, a pattern the prosecution characterizes as a deliberate attempt at a cover story. He returned home early on April 24th, went to a radio interview for the album, and attended the album release party later that evening. The prosecution then documents evidence of David's poor attempt at concealing the crime and dismembering her body, which he then left in the front trunk of his Tesla.
Burke placed her body in the inflatable pool he'd ordered to prevent her blood from spilling onto his garage floor, and used a chainsaw to cut off her limbs.
Surveillance footage confirms David drove his Tesla for the last time on July 29, 2025, before parking it on Bluebird Avenue in Hollywood Hills and departing for his concert tour. And this is the alleged story we have so far on how David potentially murdered Celeste and then continued with life like nothing happened.
My only thing is, at this stage, she's not in contact with the family, but that's the part I need to understand. At this point, was anyone during this specific encounter, who was she in contact with? Because had anyone been with her or dissuade her against doing this, I mean, you could probably have this very, very vile human being in this same situation, but with a life saved. I wonder. But again, this is a part of the grooming result. Likely disincentivize some contact to other peers and those who are like guardian figures. How
The following analysis I'll give is based on if the evidence presented by the prosecution is factual and proven, and is just my opinion. But the first thing that I believe to be true is that David demonstrates a dark triad personality. The dark triad is a mix of 3 personality constructs: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, identified in psychological literature as co-occurring and collectively associated with manipulative, exploitative, and callous interpersonal behavior. And I believe all 3 appear relevant to David's documented behavioral profile. Narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, is characterized by grandiosity, a persistent need for admiration, entitlement, and a lack of genuine empathy. Subclinical narcissistic traits, which don't meet the full diagnostic threshold but are clinically meaningful, are observable in David's behavior across multiple domains. The construction of an elaborate multi-persona identity architecture, the use of a child as a participant in his artistic and fantasy world, the apparent expectation that normal rules, including the laws, didn't apply to him, and the documented use of financial resources to purchase compliance from multiple parties, like Celeste.
People think this is, I'm not gonna lie, this guy clearly is I'm not gonna say a multi-offender, but this guy, this was not the first attempt, I guarantee. And this is definitely not the only one.
Classmates and potentially others, rather than just accepting social or legal constraints. He continued pursuit of Celeste after direct law enforcement contact, despite being explicitly told that she was a 13-year-old runaway, which just demonstrates how important he thought he was. Narcissistic individuals frequently exhibit a belief that ordinary legal and social constraints are obstacles that apply to others, but not them. Machiavellianism refers to a strategic, manipulative orientation towards interpersonal relationships. In simpler terms, using others as instruments towards personal goals, maintaining multiple social presentations simultaneously, and planning several steps ahead in your devious plans. David's documented behavior across the 2022 to 2025 period is consistent with this profile. The staged disclosure of his relationship that was sufficient to lend his music credibility, but not enough to expose it, the financial management of witnesses, the claimed media training of a minor to manage his public perception, and the fake name he used on the Amazon purchases when trying to cover his murder trail. Psychopathy is characterized by reduced fear response, diminished empathy, shallow affect, and the capacity to engage in harmful behavior without the guilt and anxiety that normally regulates such behavior in normal individuals. What's actually happening in the brain is reduced amygdala reactivity, meaning the internal alarm system that makes violence psychologically hard to deal with is significantly reduced. David's deliberate desensitization program beginning at 14, his awareness of this process,
recognizing something here. So the final stage in this for him was something in play 6 years ago.
saying, "I watch God to desensitize the part of my brain that feels empathy to the wrong things," and his ability, if the allegations are accurate, to attend a radio interview and album release party within hours of the alleged murder are all consistent with elevated psychopathic traits. The prosecution's timeline describes someone who moved through the alleged crime and its immediate aftermath in a goal-directed, organized manner without visible emotional disruption to his public functioning. He saw the murder and the cleanup as a task to get out the way, rather than a major disturbance to his life. It's important to note that psychopathy exists on a continuum. High psychopathic traits do not predict violence on their own. They represent a reduction in the internal constraints that make violence improbable for most people. You can definitely have psychopathic traits and go through life without killing anyone, but if you had to, or if you believed you had to, it wouldn't be hard for you to mentally process. The best way I see fit to analyzing the rest of his psychology is by answering some common questions surrounding the case. The first is, was David born with psychopathic traits, or did the environment shape him like this? The evidence doesn't support a simple nature or nurture answer, and the research literature on psychopathy doesn't even need one. Studies on antisocial personality disorder, which is the more official diagnosis with traits similar to psychopathy, have found that genetic predisposition is a real factor, but it's not determinative, meaning genes do play some part, but it needs more than that. What the developmental history suggests is that David likely had some dispositional features like his elevated sensation seeking, a reduced fear response, a natural tendency towards social observation over social participation that interacted with a profoundly adverse developmental environment. The isolation he experienced in homeschooling removed the social components that normally regulate and redirect dark impulses in adolescence, such as peer feedback, mentorship, romantic experience within age-appropriate contexts, and the reality testing that comes from genuine reciprocal relationships. Basically, when you're in school and you're weird, people are going to tell you you're weird and they're not going to be friends with you, and that's going to cause you to not be weird. The gore consumption,
or work with me here, that was happening on a consistent basis. Just to him, as his masterful persona continues to change, disregard it. Who are they in this story? I'm the storyteller. Roll tape. I predict, multiple occasions, it's not directly said, but the line that he gives away tells you it for you. Why aren't people hitting my phone up when I was transitioned to homeschool? How could those relationships he forged not translate to anything? I've had similar sayings. I've said that to myself as well. Made up even a few thoughts about it, like, oh wow, okay, this is what they're thinking, and how could this like actually translate to this? I'm thinking I'm just doing my part. I'm trying to be just a part of the flow. Or they've already mentioned to you they are probably not with you like that. Whether you see eye to eye or you're just someone to say wave to. I recognize that. I'm like, okay, cool. We could not, we can break the relationship then. That's fine. I need to understand that myself. And I did. I also just, as I got older, oh, this is how it is. Gotcha. No need to over obsess about it. I mean, like, come on, like this.
The fantasy elaboration and the emotional desensitization program didn't occur despite his isolation. They occurred, most likely, because of it. Any genetic psychopathy predisposition might have stayed more muted in a more socially connected environment, but David was given 5 years of uninterrupted space in which to develop it without correction. The next question is, if many children experience homeschooling, many children watch gore, and many children watch anime, and they don't become violent, then why was David different? The answer is not any single factor, but the specific combination and timing of factors, and the absence of mitigating ones. 3 elements distinguish David's profile from the general population of adolescents who share some of his experiences. First, the duration and completeness of his social isolation was extreme. Not partial homeschooling with peer contact, but 5 years of near total isolation during the precise developmental window where identity and empathy are formed through reciprocal relationship. Fair enough if they let him go to some sports clubs and he got to meet people weekly, but he was completely alone. Second, his response to that isolation was not passive, but active, as he built an increasingly elaborate internal fantasy world in which violent romantic narratives were central, and he deliberately used that period.
I'm gonna tell you right now, that first one is full of BS. Again, I'm not gonna point out streamers specifically, but credit to the powers that be for doing a wonderful, masterful job at just translating this into the big stage. You can see it in the streamers now, not his case in particular, but they have peer contact, they have money, but the traits still remain. If they, of who they would be without the fame. I know at least four in particular, four streamers in particular. I would love to say their names so bad, but this is not a streamer call out video. So, with that being said, we can continue.
To pursue desensitization by watching gore videos. Third, and perhaps most critically, nothing corrected the trajectory. There were no peer relationships to provide reality feedback. There were no teachers or mentors who intervened. When his dark material reached the public, it was celebrated. When law enforcement contacted him directly about a 13-year-old runner.
See, I'm telling you that's not a him exclusive thing. The system was simply changing in a completely just like, what the way? Like, this is the response to children that could potentially just not be all the way there. You're not gonna ask any questions. We just ignoring stuff. Okay, and we were cooked so many years ago. Like, I tell you, holy moly.
Anyway, he found a way around their intervention. The system of natural corrections that normally checks and redirects deviant development failed at every point. Another question is, with his fantasies and music content, did David always have a lust for murder, or did circumstance just cause him to kill in that moment? Neither characterization is fully accurate. Despite how wild our minds like to run with conspiracy, evidence doesn't support a long-term conscious plan to murder Celeste.
Okay, I'm gonna be real with you. This video, as I appreciate you, brother, but holy moly, that's why we gotta leave it to the experts. Like, brother, you're this is level 2 critical thinking. Even if you're making a video, bro, this is level 2 critical thinking. Like, level 2. If there's 7 levels, this is literally level 2. Like, guys, we gotta do better.
There's no indication he groomed her with killing in mind from the outset.
Okay, sure, he didn't have her in mind. Like, let's play this game, brother. He did not have her in mind. He had anyone who he can get his hands on in mind as a part of his fucking story. Holy shit. Like, dude. And who says this is the only person? Like, I guarantee there are many more underage people that was clearly part of this case, just never got to tell their side or figured it out well in advance. And then he chooses the young person that has issues with their current situations with their families. Like, I guess that's just nothing.
The evidence does intertwine, and in which he had repeated deliberately, in which romantic relationships and fatal violence were thematically intertwined, in which he had deliberately engineered his own emotional desensitization to that violence.
Again, not necessarily like taking jabs at this video, but it's like at certain points the willingness for just like hearing and understanding, like, in the back of my mind, I'm psychoanalyzing the pieces of information he's providing. Like, he's doing a great job. I'm just giving a general thesis for like those that have no idea what's going on. But I mean, I'm sorry, this is like, for me, this is way beyond that.
And in which he had repeatedly rehearsed through his music videos, through lyrics, fantasy, and alter ego construction, the psychological experience of killing a partner and feeling nothing. Whether or not he consciously intended to kill Celeste, he had spent years building the psychological infrastructure that made it executable. The prosecution's alleged motive that he was silencing a threat to his career is entirely plausible as a proximate trigger, but the proximate trigger ignited something that had been laid down over a long period of time. A person without
I hope that's not their only defense. They need to be going at, brother. These signs, he was simply building all of these signs as a unit. Like, let's attack every other angle. What do we not know throughout these years. Like, people are trying to just get like hard evidence on just this. We need to be figuring out like the years leading up to this, what was going on. There's clearly a pattern here. And this is simply the first successful attempt at this story, because remember, he had multiple personas, and I guarantee those personas had stories. You see what I'm getting at? You starting to see it now? He wasn't able to finish 2 out of his 4 characters.
Psychological infrastructure, confronted with the same threat, would not have had the same response. They might have offered to talk about things, maybe to pay her off, or something, but not murder. A very common question is, why did he leave the body in his Tesla and then just go on tour? Was it narcissistic overconfidence or something else? There's the theory that he wanted the body to be found so that everyone could appreciate the art of his crime. And whilst psychologically intriguing, it doesn't hold up well against the broader evidence. The prosecution documents are...
You don't need to think of evidence. Look at this picture. Like, this is it. This is the... He must have been following some of the serial weirdos of the past, because like this fits the description of like the vision they're trying to oh god.
Person who used a false name to purchase disposable equipment, drove to Santa Barbara County to destroy evidence the night of the alleged murder, made deliberate false statements to law enforcement, and continued attempting to incinerate evidence months later, as he bought a burn cage in July that he didn't end up using. This is not the behavior of someone wanting the body to be discovered. It's the behavior of someone who believed he was managing the situation competently. The most clinically consistent explanation is indeed narcissistic overconfidence.
No, it was a bit of both. Okay, how can I describe this? If an MO can change, so can your tactics. Perhaps I say it was a 2-for-1 play. Like if the guy's making characters and stories, like everything's on the table. I'm calling this a 2-for-1 special. He was like, I'm sorry. Personally, to me, this is
a well-documented feature of individuals who combine high narcissistic and psychopathic traits. The belief isn't simply I am above the law in an abstract sense. It's the belief that the individual's intelligence, status, and resources are sufficient to manage any problem. Leaving the car on the street rather than disposing of it properly is a catastrophic risk assessment failure, but it's consistent with the same cognitive pattern that led him to go to his radio interview the morning after the alleged murder. The operational logic appears to have been, the car is not at my address, it's a few hundred feet away, I'm about to leave on tour, and this is manageable. He definitely thought that Celeste running away all the time was going to play to his advantage, as no one would be looking for her. But when it comes to dead bodies decomposing, you don't look for that smell. The smell finds you. The question most fascinating to me, especially when watching through all of his TikTok videos following the proposed date of the alleged murder, is what allowed him to continue functioning normally after the fact. Several interacting psychological mechanisms are relevant here. The first is the reduced guilt and anxiety response associated with elevated psychopathic traits. The internal system that makes violent acts psychologically disabling for most people was, in David's case, already significantly reduced.
You know what's funnier? It's not like conspiracy brain, but to go forward with the celebrities that he was trying to involve himself with, you know, so all of the... This goes even deeper to like what the grand plan, just like hypothetically, like imagine if this was just stage 1 of this wacko story. Remember those other characters? Like they could have involved other people, and I think celebrities were some of those people, just to say the least. I whatever the play was after that, I'll stop there because you don't really have an idea, but seems like a effort to collaborate with or get people into his world. For what purpose? I don't know.
Through years of deliberate desensitization. The second is compartmentalization. a defense mechanism in which an individual maintains separate psychological areas that don't interact, allowing normal social functioning to continue in one area while extreme events are contained in another. The third is the role of his persona architecture. David had spent years living between constructed identities, none of which were his actual self. Switching to David the artist for a radio interview was not a performance grafted onto a traumatized person. It was, by that point, his default public mode of existence. He was the psychopathic and cold version of himself that night, and switched his persona to David the artist by the following morning. Finally, if the prosecution's characterization of the alleged murder as an act to silence Celeste is accurate, then there was no emotional conflict to suppress. The act achieved its objective. The threat was eliminated. For someone with the psychological profile described in this video, David saw this more as completing a task rather than being horrified at what he'd done. So it wasn't that deep to him, and that's why there were no signs, at least publicly, of breakdown or panic. Now, the final two are significantly important to many of you watching. Firstly, was David an actual pedo that would have pursued other underage girls, or was Celeste's age just incidental to timing? The evidence doesn't actually support primary pedophilic orientation as the dominant motivation, as I addressed earlier. However, the pattern of seeking a relationship with someone significantly younger, from an unstable home, and therefore highly susceptible to the power dynamic he preferred, is unlikely to be entirely incidental. The specific age of Celeste, 11 at first contact, 13 at the alleged start of the physical relationship, may reflect opportunity and controllability rather than exclusive attraction to that age group. Whether he would have sought out other minors depends significantly on whether the control and power dynamic, rather than the age itself, was the primary draw. The evidence leans towards him just preferring the control aspect, which suggests that his targets might have included adult women in vulnerable circumstances just as much as minors specifically. In simple terms, I don't believe he cares if it's an
vulnerable circumstances. Again, this, oh boy, what I am just cultivating in my mind of like the grand plan, if he was anyhow able to continue in any regular life setting, regular like just life setting without consequences, that is where it gets like, okay, we need to come together to make sure he is not a problem for the rest of the youth and the collective. But what I mean is, like, again, I have theory that, hypothetical, his playbook wanted to include, his story needed to include the people, the celebrities he was in contact with, he was having songs and collabs with. That was a part of the playbook. David, knowing him, thought about this in advance, so they were going to eventually play some part. Maybe it couldn't have been, it likely isn't a large part, but it was going to be a part, some part to play in this these characters in these chapters.
Adult or a minor, just so as long as he can control them. And the final question, if not caught for this alleged murder, would David have killed again? On the available evidence, a second murder was not inevitable, but the risk profile wasn't low. The alleged murder, if accurately characterized by the prosecution, was carried out to eliminate a specific threat to a specific goal, which was protecting him.
Again, one thing I love about this guy is he's laying out the story. One thing I don't like about this guy is he's laying out the story like, okay, all right, protecting his career. I'm glad you highlighted this very, very good concept, because what do you think was going to happen? Like, time was never going to heal this wound, my friend. This would have been worse the longer it was not brought to light. Now, he has a media career. He had friends at the time. I think I still consider them his friends, certain streamers that was showing his music and defending him, and was a part of his videos. Two streamers in particular, but one of them is a guy like, and you think other females would have just let that go and you thought the result would have been different? Wow, this look. Talk about giving a defense attorney something to think about. Like this is so funny because this is why people who laugh at the next video I'm gonna play, which is Jayoma, showing plausible like angles to attack as a defense attorney. I mean, this video is like a clear example of just like the thought process of like a regular person. It's not the thought process of a regular person, a thought process for regular people into the mindset of like using allegedly and then like not ways out but like alternatives to like motive. I'm like, brother, nope.
His career. This is different from the profile of a serial killer driven by compulsion or escalating fan.
This is exactly the profile of a serial killer. Keep in mind, he is 20 at this point. Sorry, 18. This is a serial killer. Tendencies, rather.
Dismemberment, the ongoing attempts to destroy evidence, the continued public functioning, is consistent with someone who didn't experience sufficient psychological cost from the act to be deterred from repeating it under similar circumstances. If the career threat had risen again with another person in a position to expose damaging information, the psychological barriers to a similar response would have been lower the second time, not higher. Basically, if the same situation repeated itself with another girl like Celeste, David would just say, "It worked the first time, so I'll do it again." But I don't believe he'd go around his life trying to find people to murder. So, how do we summarize?
Some points in this video have me saying N-word what? Because what? But again, this is me obviously being more vocal because I'm too quiet in videos and then too like trying to be stoic monk. No, we don't need to do that. You can express, just speak with the video. This is a reaction video, so I should be like responding. But yeah, this video has like 10 moments of just like, have you know, this is a analysis video, but have you like, was this the intended purpose? Because again, I'm lost at, this doesn't basically go over anything. Like, I would say half of this video is probably, he probably could have cut this video in half, and then the other half could have been talking about like the real issues, how like maybe the institutions at large play a bigger role into this, or how the lack of just like any ability to catch this and then put him in places that would actually strip this behavior or do the best it can, or just remove him from environments where he could influence or affect them in a bad way. Again, celebrities in general, streamers, new age versions of like this, how it's still being done. I can keep going on and on, but I love
David
the video,
Anthony
though,
Burke's trajectory is not the product of a single cause.
In hindsight, I like the video, really well created, layered. But man, he says some head scratching things, and then I'm glad the comments do not.
And it doesn't follow the profile of someone who is always going to commit a violent crime. It follows the profile of someone whose dispositional characteristics were given an extreme developmental environment in which those characteristics were amplified, reinforced, and never corrected.
Bro, he made characters. Like, every time I hear this, I'm just like, bro, he made characters, bro. This guy had characters. No. Like, enough.
Schooling decision at 13 was the rupture, not because it was inherently abusive, because it removed the entire social architecture within which deviant development is normally detected and corrected, and replaced it with 5 years of unstructured internet access and internal elaboration. The resulting internal world, saturated with violent romantic fantasy, deliberately desensitized emotions, and a constructed alter ego who committed murders, was then given a commercial platform that celebrated rather than challenged it. The relationship with Celeste Rivas Hernandez was built on the structural conditions his isolation had created, an online social infrastructure that gave him access to vulnerable people, a power dynamic he had never experienced in any other relational context, and a fantasy framework that had always positioned a romantic partner as someone he would end up killing. What the prosecution alleges is that when that relationship produced a threat to his survival, both professionally and financially, the psychological infrastructure necessary to respond violently was formed, and the psychological barriers that would have made most people unable to act on that response weren't. Celeste Rivas Hernandez was 14 years old. She was reported missing by her family multiple times. She had reached out to the one adult who was supposed to care for her and was told that she was wanted, loved, and seen, or at least made to feel that way at one point in their relationship. The prosecution alleges that that same person who told her those things ordered the Uber that brought her to his door and stood by as she bled out on the floor of his Hollywood Hills home. The warning signs were there, in his music, in his disc.
Alright, we don't need to watch this. I think like in the end of the video is basically like tying up all together, stuff like that. Wisdom, great job, great video. Straight up, some aspects of this, like 10 segments, were bullshit. They spoke of like a defense attorney who would have like an angle of a way out of this. Some just like neglect of just not speaking on the bigger issues at hand of like a system that would, a system that couldn't catch this, or just airtight defense against this. Brother, you need an airtight defense against this. Your system isn't systeming, just straight up. Like, your system is just dog water. This should be a run in the park, like a casual stroll on just like a sentencing for life or whatever his fate should be, and then you move on to the much bigger crumbs in crime. So that's going to be this video. I am going to